If the stones of Jerusalem could speak, they would not tell one story. They would remember a spring flowing below a narrow ridge. They would remember walls rising in fear of an empire, smoke above a conquered city, builders carrying stone with one hand and guarding the work with the other, and pilgrims climbing toward a temple whose courts could be seen from far away. They would remember kings, merchants, priests, potters, soldiers, children, widows, foreigners, and worshippers. They would remember songs of ascent and the sound of siege engines. They would remember ordinary meals eaten in small courtyards and national prayers offered before thousands. This is ancient Jerusalem, the city behind the Bible. But we must begin with a warning. There was no single biblical Jerusalem frozen in one perfect moment. The settlement David entered was not the city Hezekiah defended. Hezekiah's Jerusalem was not the city Nehemiah rebuilt. And the Jerusalem Jesus knew in the first century was larger, more monumental, and shaped by a different political world. So, this journey will not pretend that every wall, gate, street, and house belongs to the same century. We will move through layers. At each layer, we will distinguish the biblical text from archaeological evidence, historical reconstruction, and questions that remain debated. The first fact is geography. Ancient Jerusalem did not begin inside the full boundaries of the later Old City. Its early core lay on a narrow ridge south of the area later occupied by the Great Temple Platform. The Kidron Valley dropped sharply on the east. Another valley ran along the west. Although centuries of building and debris changed its appearance, the Hinnom Valley curved around the south and west. This ridge was not the easiest place to build a great capital. It did not sit on a broad river. It stood in the limestone hills, away from the major coastal highway. Yet it possessed what every settlement needed, a dependable water source. The Gihon Spring emerged on the eastern slope near the Kidron Valley. Before palaces, monumental walls, and pilgrimage streets, there was water. Archaeology shows occupation in the area long before the reign of David. The precise identification and interpretation of some early structures remain disputed. But the ridge was already an ancient inhabited place when the biblical narrative reaches it. 2 Samuel calls the stronghold Jebus and describes it as held by the Jebusites. David, newly recognized as king over all Israel, marched against the city. Its defenders spoke with confidence, but David captured the stronghold of Zion. The account includes a difficult word, often connected with a water channel or shaft. Readers have sometimes treated one particular underground system as the exact root of the conquest. That identification is debated. The Bible gives a terse account. Archaeology reveals complex waterworks from different phases. Certainty requires more than making the two fit at first glance. Why choose this city? Jerusalem stood between the older tribal heartlands of Judah and Benjamin. It offered a defensible ridge and a capital not fully identified with one established tribal center. Politically, it could unite. Geographically, it could be fortified. Spiritually, its meaning was about to deepen. 2 Samuel 6 describes David bringing the Ark of Yahweh into the city. The procession joined royal capital and sacred memory. Jerusalem was becoming more than a military stronghold. It was becoming the place from which the king ruled and toward which Israel's worship would increasingly turn. We should resist the temptation to picture David's Jerusalem as a vast marble metropolis. It was compact by later standards. Houses climbed a steep ridge, retaining walls, terraces, narrow passages, storage spaces, and courtyards shaped daily movement. The city was impressive because of its position, defenses, and meaning, not because it resembled imperial Rome. The archaeology of David's 10th century Jerusalem is one of the most debated subjects in biblical studies. Large stone structures have been linked by some excavators to royal building and interpreted differently by others. The existence of the debate does not require us to erase the biblical story, and the biblical story does not permit us to claim that every disputed ruin has been conclusively identified. The honest view holds text and material evidence together without forcing either to say more than it can. The next great transformation is associated with Solomon. 1 Kings describes a temple built for the name of Yahweh with carefully measured rooms, cedar, carved decoration, bronze furnishings, and an inner sanctuary. When the ark was brought into the completed temple, the narrative says that a cloud filled the house. Solomon's prayer then reached beyond architecture. He acknowledged that even heaven could not contain God, much less a building made by human hands. That boundary matters for our imagination. The temple was central, but God was not reduced to stone. And because no complete First Temple survives for direct inspection, modern visual reconstructions are models built from the biblical description, regional architectural comparisons, and archaeological fragments. They are not photographs of certainty. Below the temple and royal buildings, ordinary life continued. At dawn, a household might stir around a small courtyard. Grain had to be ground. Dough had to be prepared. Water had to be collected and stored. Oil lamps required fuel. Clay cooking pots blackened near hearths. Storage jars held grain, oil, wine, or other provisions. Roofs and terraces created workspaces as well as places to catch air in the heat. Craft workers shaped clay, cut stone, worked wood, and repaired tools. Animals moved through gates and narrow routes. Merchants measured goods. Officials sealed containers and documents. Priests served according to their duties, while farmers beyond the walls supported the city's appetite. These details do not all come from one excavated house or one verse. They come from the combination of biblical references, objects recovered from Iron Age contexts, and what is known of household life in the southern Levant. The city was sacred in Israel's memory, but holiness did not remove the need to bake bread, mend cloth, carry water, and empty refuse. Jerusalem was also a city of inequality. Royal and administrative buildings required resources. Larger homes and imported objects belonged to some residents, while others lived with far less. The Bible itself repeatedly allows prophets to challenge leaders who separated public worship from justice. To walk the city, honestly, is to see both altar and marketplace, palace and worker, celebration and burden. By the late 8th century before Christ, Jerusalem faced a new world of danger. The Assyrian Empire had destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel and pressed south. Refugees and population growth may help explain the expansion of Jerusalem onto the Western Hill during the late First Temple period. A massive fortification known today as the Broad Wall survives in the Jewish quarter. Its dating and context connect it with the city's expansion and defense in this era. 2 Kings 18 tells us that Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came against the fortified cities of Judah. Hezekiah had rebelled. The Assyrian field commander stood near Jerusalem and spoke so that people on the wall could hear. His message attacked confidence itself. Do not trust Egypt, do not trust Hezekiah. Do not trust Yahweh to deliver this city. This was psychological warfare before it was a breach in stone. Hezekiah's preparations included water. 2 Kings 20 remembers how he made the pool and the conduit and brought water into the city. 2 Chronicles says he stopped the upper spring of the Gihon and directed the water toward the west side of David's city. The rock-cut tunnel, traditionally associated with Hezekiah, carries water from the Gihon toward the pool of Siloam. An ancient Hebrew inscription found in the tunnel describes two teams cutting toward each other and hearing one another through the rock before the breakthrough. It does not name Hezekiah, but its script and the engineering work belong to the world of late First Temple Jerusalem. Scholars have debated elements of the tunnel's exact dating and development, so the safest conclusion is strong association, not careless certainty about every phase. Imagine the labor without turning it into legend. Men worked by lamplight inside stone. Their tools struck limestone in confined air. Debris had to be removed. Direction had to be maintained along a winding route. When the teams finally met, water could flow to a protected collection point inside the defended area. Above them, families heard Assyria's threats. 2 Kings says the people on the wall remained silent because Hezekiah had commanded them not to answer. That silence was not the indecision of Mount Carmel. It was disciplined refusal to let an enemy spokesman control the city's response. The biblical account attributes Jerusalem's deliverance to Yahweh. Assyrian records confirm Sennacherib's campaign in Judah and his pressure on Hezekiah, though they present events from imperial perspective. The sources meet, but they do not speak with one voice or purpose. Scripture interprets the crisis theologically. Royal inscriptions magnify the king who commissioned them. Archaeology supplies another set of traces. Jerusalem survived Assyria. It did not survive every empire. In the early 6th century before Christ, Babylonian armies came against the city. 2 Kings 25 describes the siege, the breach in the wall, the capture of the king, the burning of Yahweh's house, the palace, and the great houses of Jerusalem. The walls were broken down, vessels were taken, and many people were carried away. Archaeologists have found destruction deposits from the end of the First Temple period in parts of Jerusalem, burned material, collapsed structures, arrowheads, broken vessels, and objects abandoned in catastrophe. No single ash layer tells the whole biblical story. Together, material remains establish that violent destruction was not merely a literary mood. A city ended. For survivors and exiles, Jerusalem became both ruin and memory. Psalm 137 imagines exiles weeping when they remembered. Zio's lamentation speaks from the devastation of a city once full of people. These writings refuse to treat buildings as the only loss. The destruction meant broken community, interrupted worship, political collapse, death, displacement, and the crisis of wondering how covenant hope could endure judgment. Yet Jerusalem was rebuilt. After Babylon fell to Persia, groups of Judean exiles returned. The books of Ezra and Nehemiah describe restored worship, contested rebuilding, economic strain, opposition, and the repair of walls and gates. Nehemiah arrives, inspects the damaged walls by night, and calls the people to rebuild. The famous image of builders working while prepared for danger comes from Nehemiah 4. The text describes burden-bearers working with one hand and holding a weapon with the other, while builders wore a sword. This is not a romantic construction scene. It is a community laboring under fear. The exact line of every wall and the identification of every named gate remain debated. Jerusalem in the Persian period was smaller than the enormous first-century city many viewers picture. Restoration was real, but it was not an instant return to former splendor. Centuries passed, Greek-speaking kingdoms ruled the region. The Hasmonean period brought another expansion. Archaeological research indicates that Jerusalem again spread toward the southwestern hill, and fortifications, residences, reservoirs, workshops, and roads changed the city. Then Herod the Great transformed Jerusalem on a monumental scale. The temple platform was expanded with immense retaining walls. The sanctuary complex was rebuilt in splendor. Streets and stairways served the movement of residents and pilgrims. Shops clustered along busy routes. Ritual baths, called mikvot, have been found near approaches associated with the temple. Quarries supplied stone, aqueducts, and pools supported a city that swelled during festivals. This is the Jerusalem of the late Second Temple period, the city closest to the setting of the Gospels. Again, we must separate evidence from imagination. The large-scale model displayed at the Israel Museum is a scholarly reconstruction of Jerusalem around the 1st century. It helps viewers understand terrain and urban relationships, but a model is an argument made visible. Some buildings and wall lines are better established than others. The model should guide questions, not end them. What might a pilgrim have experienced? The approach to Jerusalem involved ascent. The city sits high in the Judean hills, and biblical pilgrims sang songs of ascent as they traveled. Psalm 122 says, "I was glad when they said to me, 'Let's go to Yahweh's house.' Our feet are standing within your gates, Jerusalem." The journey was physical and spiritual. Travelers climbed dusty roads. They found lodging, purchased food, prepared offerings, exchanged news, and navigated crowds. From the Mount of Olives, the temple complex dominated the view across the Kidron Valley. From the south, pilgrims near the Pool of Siloam could move uphill along a stepped street toward the temple area. Archaeological excavation has revealed portions of this stepped street and the drainage channel beneath it. Coins, pottery, stone vessels, and architectural remains offer fragments of urban life. They do not allow us to assign a known biblical person to every paving stone. They do make the first-century city tangible. The Gospels place Jesus repeatedly in Jerusalem. Luke remembers him coming as a child with his family for Passover. Later accounts describe his entry into the city, teaching in the temple, disputes with authorities, meals with disciples, arrest, crucifixion outside the city, and resurrection faith proclaimed by his followers. The precise route of every movement cannot be reconstructed with confidence. Streets shifted. Later buildings covered earlier levels. Traditions developed at different times. A reverent historical approach does not need to manufacture certainty. The gospel story is not strengthened by attaching Jesus to every stone a guide can point toward. What can be said is that Jesus entered a living Jewish city shaped by scripture, pilgrimage, Roman power, priestly authority, commerce, expectation, and tension. He did not walk through an empty museum. He walked among people buying, praying, arguing, carrying, watching, and hoping. In the year 70, Roman forces destroyed Jerusalem and the temple after revolt. Fallen stones near the western retaining wall, destruction layers, burned buildings, and objects trapped in collapse bear witness to catastrophe. The historian Josephus supplies a long literary account written with his own position and purposes. Archaeology and text again illuminate one another without becoming identical. The city continued after 70, but the biblical era journey we have followed reaches a decisive break. The ridge beside the spring had become a capital. The capital had become the center of temple worship. It had expanded, fallen, returned, expanded again, and fallen again. What does ancient Jerusalem teach us? First, biblical places have layers. A name can remain while streets, walls, populations, and political powers change. Reading carefully means asking which Jerusalem a passage describes. Second, geography matters. The spring, ridge, valleys, ascent, walls, and roads are not decoration. They shape the choices people made and the images biblical writers used. When a psalm speaks of going up to Jerusalem, it belongs to a landscape as well as a spiritual longing. Third, archaeology is most useful when it is allowed to be archaeology. A jar handle, wall, tunnel, drain, or burned room can tell us much. It cannot answer every theological question. Scripture is not a modern excavation report, and an excavation report is not a creed. Neither should be distorted to perform the other's task. Fourth, sacred history includes ordinary life. Jerusalem's great moments depended on people whose names were not preserved. Those who carried water, shaped jars, cut stone, baked bread, cleaned courtyards, guarded gates, copied texts, welcomed pilgrims, and buried the dead. The city behind the Bible was inhabited by human beings, not only by famous characters. Finally, Jerusalem holds memory and hope together. In Scripture, it can be praised, judged, mourned, rebuilt, and longed for. Its stones remember human ambition and human fragility. Its prayers reach beyond the stones toward the God whom, as Solomon confessed, even heaven cannot contain. So when you imagine Jerusalem, do not imagine one perfect city floating outside history. See the small ridge beside the Gihon. See David's stronghold. See households waking before dawn. See Hezekiah's workers cutting through rock while Assyria waits beyond the walls. See Babylonian smoke and the long road of exile. See Nehemiah's builders lifting fallen stones. See pilgrims climbing through the crowded Herodian city. See the temple shining above streets filled with ordinary lives. Then, let the layers remain distinct. The Bible's city is not less meaningful because its history is complicated. It is more human, more vulnerable, and more honest. Jerusalem endured because memory could survive broken walls. Worship could continue after loss, and hope could be carried by people even when stone could not be saved. If this journey helped you see Scripture with greater clarity, like the video, subscribe to Sacred Archives, and share it with someone who loves biblical history.